Hi, everybody. This is Micah Lieberman with Scope in the US and Europe and with Clinico. And every so often, I get to do one of these fun videos because I talk to a lot of interesting people in clinical research, clinical trial innovation, clinical trial technology, and all this stuff. So today, I have Dr. Muhammed Idris from Morehouse School of Medicine. And he and I met at Scope a couple years back because there was a keynote panel thanks to Vicky DBA, so from Sanofi, Beacon of Hope panel. And it was bringing in investigators and deans of schools of medicine from historically Black colleges, kind of talking about, hey, how do we actually get investigators and keep investigators involved in clinical research? So that's how we met. So welcome aboard. Good to see you, Mohammed.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
Hey, man. So we're going to talk about something, but before we do that, last time we talked, we were just talking personal stuff, fun stuff, and you have an interesting story. And it was kind of like, how did you end up, not in medicine, but how did you end up in clinical research? Because you're running trials, you're an investigator, you're a doctor, you have multiple roles and you're able to do it. And I kind of asked, I said, how did you get into clinical research? So it's an
Yeah,
interesting story. So share that before we start talking about other
for
stuff.
sure, for sure. Yeah. So I guess first quick disclaimer, I am a doctor, but a PhD. And a lot of work that I do is really on that clinical trial operations and innovation side of things. But the funny part is, I'm a assistant professor in the Department of Medicine, associate director within our clinical research center. But actually the last science class that I took was probably back in high school or early college. So it really is kind of a crazy, crazy story for me. So I actually started off in the hedge fund space at a company you probably heard of called BlackRock. Eventually was encouraged to go do my PhD around the time data science was becoming quite popular. And then since then, jumped around a little bit, did some work in industry, in startups and venture capital. And I guess what I had in all of those roles was really a front seat in trying to understand how AI is revolutionizing everything. And I mean absolutely everything.
Yes.
And luckily enough, because of the technical skills that I had, because of the kind of wide variety, varied experiences that I was able to put together, I actually had the privilege of being able to select a sector where I felt that AI can actually impact lives. And of course, it's no surprise to me or you, healthcare is definitely the case. And part of the reason why I came to Morehouse School of Medicine specifically is because of a thesis that I had around AI and kind of healthcare more broadly. Basically goes something like this, that if we're not intentional about ensuring that the benefits of AI and machine learning are equally distributed, then what we're probably going to see 10 years from now is that AI has improved health overall, but we're actually going to see greater health disparities over time between those who have and those who don't. And so that's specifically why I chose to come to Morehouse School of Medicine, because we really are, I would say, at the forefront of ensuring that health disparities and communities from that are disproportionately impacted by those disparities are really kind of front and center of everything that we do. And of course, clinical research is really the tip of the spear there. And so on the clinical research side of things, you could imagine, right, there is so much happening in terms of AI kind of revolutionizing drug development, right? So the most recent Nobel Prize in chemistry, right, went to Gen AI, one researchers and some folks from at Google. But what we have not seen, and this is something I definitely experienced in my day-to-day at our clinical research center, is the lack of innovation when it comes to clinical trial operations, right? And so the way I like to think
Okay.
about it is like, okay, this is really exciting. We're going to have so many new therapeutics, biologics on the market, right? But do we really have the capacity to actually bring them to market in a way that's actually safe? And this is interesting for me, Micah, because, I spend a lot of my time as an academic kind of thinking about interesting and trying to apply AI and machine learning in a variety of contexts. But this is really one where we really need to think through the operational capacity building, the implementation science of it, right? And so for me, I've started to focus a lot of my energy on trying to understand ways in which we could identify the appropriate use cases and then solve those use cases using AI and machine learning. And sometimes, to be honest with you, it's not AI or machine learning. And so, for example,
Right.
there are folks who are doing work in leveraging AI for protocol development and amendments, site selection, things like being able to find patients in these really large
This is
data sets.
exactly what I was going to
So
ask you. I was
this
going to say,
really, yeah,
what? Because what you're saying
yeah,
is, hey, we're providing care. You
yeah,
work in the School of Medicine. You're teaching.
Yeah.
But you mentioned a few things, and this is really the language of my audience, right? Which is, okay, I got all these therapeutics, I got a huge complicated pipeline. After all this sophisticated science is utilized to choose those molecules and get them through early development, now we're starting to go out into huge populations and we're competing for the same patients. There's a shortage of investigators per the panel we had together at Scope a number of years back. That is not That's not like cutting edge science. This is ops, man. So keep
Yeah.
going. How
I love it.
Thinking about patient recruitment, thinking
Yeah.
about this new technology, this ability, all these analytics, all these huge data sets, internal, external, using real world data. What do you guys what are you seeing? What are you doing to leverage this to kind of better identify patients, better recruit
For
patients
sure.
for research?
Definitely, definitely. So I'm actually going to take you back to first working in industry, right? And data science was the hot thing. And what we saw kind of during that kind of wave of digital transformation is that there was a lot of excitement about what the technology could do, but we weren't really able to translate those into tractable solutions, right? That actually affect our bottom line. And so what does that look like in clinical trial in the sort of in the clinical recruitment participant recruitment space, for example, right? So I'll give you a good example, right? We want to leverage these massive EHR records, right? Structured data, unstructured data, imaging data in order to, let's say, identify potential candidates. Okay, well, that's only half the problem. At some point, you actually need to start talking to people, and you might need the competitive advantage in terms of being able to pre-qualify and get them to consent. Now, that is a very, very specific problem. And I'll tell you this, in most people that I talk to, nobody really knows what's happening at the point of recruitment, right? And so my background actually is in natural language processing. And so a lot of the work that I'm doing right now is trying to collect data in literally the conversations that your clinical research coordinators are having with prospective candidates, right? And we can use a lot of natural language processing techniques that have existed long before the generative AI stuff, but even some generative AI technologies to identify things like what are the frequently asked questions, right? What are the barriers to participation? What are some clinical research coordinators are saying or doing to overcome those, while others may not be? And so if we're able to do that and collect these sort of operational metrics, it gives you a few kind of just right off the bat key benefits, right? Number one, is that you're able to see what's working and what's not working, right? In terms of what people are actually saying. You could then translate that into, for example, actual training materials, right? So you could actually do coaching. And then thirdly, if let's say you are a clinical research, a CRO, or if you're a sponsor, if you have an idea of what's happening, the sentiment of the conversations for recruitment, you actually have now leading indicators to predict whether or not I'm going to hit my recruitment targets. And if let's say you are seeing something that's not working, it gives you early opportunities to intervene. To me, that is the perfect example of how a very specific problem and existing capabilities can actually allow us to not just enhance our capacity, but really streamline the operational efficiency. And I'll just give you one last one that I'm really excited about. I'm having some conversations with people. So I'm doing some work in the Alzheimer's space, right? And, Alzheimer's and related dementias is a very interesting all around, right? Because it's not just the person, right, that you're trying to recruit. The caregiver is an important part of the consent process, as well as perhaps the clinical trial as well. So again, there's this idea that there are many people. And then also when you think about this, the pre-qualification that's required in order to enroll somebody, right, into one of these trials, it could actually be quite a bit of work. And so there's actually work out there. They've been able to demonstrate that they can use voice as a biomarker in order to pre-qualify candidates. Now, what if I told you that we could actually incorporate that into the tool that I was just telling you about, that specifically for Alzheimer's trials, as you're talking to people, you're collecting actual data, real signal that gives you an idea of being able to characterize the patient population that you could then use as a kind of leading indicator of your ability to actually hit your recruitment targets. You're telling me that that isn't something that every single sponsor, CRO, site, as well as clinical trial manager, that is data that they could find valuable.
I have a question. This is all really exciting stuff. This is the type of stuff that I live for, my audience lives for, you get really excited about. Not every site, academic medical center, has the tools, the capabilities, the technology. You guys have hospital people, MDs, you have people like you that are PhDs, you actually have a research site with dedicated coordinators. how much work is actually involved in getting all of these disparate parts working together to also say, hey, we have a mandate, we provide care to our patients, but we also think, I mean, this is so broad. We also consider clinical research as a key part of care because it's cutting edge. And I'm not every school of medicine, not every dean of faculty, not every hospital has this cohesive unit, this shared mission. It's complicated, right? How are you guys doing it? Because obviously you're really trying to optimize the use of technology to improve not only care, but to also do double duty to actually perform research. Because then I can have a patient who I'm giving care to, but I'm also at the same time with one visit doing research. So there's not an extra burden per se, but there is a lot of infrastructure and culture, organizational kind of philosophy that needs to be in place beforehand. So I don't know if you could speak to that. Not everybody's Morehouse, not everybody's Boston, every hospital, every center is different. Big question. Is there anything that you could say, give advice or inspiration to on that?
Definitely. So I think the first thing, I just have to put it out there that Morehouse School of Medicine has been doing this long before AI and technology and digital health was even part of it, right? So it really is, to your point, a part of the lifeblood. It's literally in our mandate. The reason why we exist, right, is to provide this sort of care. I think I was kind of lucky enough to come into Morehouse within this culture in a way that there was a very specific need to build capacity around digital transformation. You know better than I, digital transformation is not digitizing everything, right? It is literally from the ground up, rethinking what are our people, processes, and platforms that we're going to be using. What is it that we're trying to achieve? Ensuring that people have the appropriate kind of time to learn these technologies, the upfront investment, necessary in order pilot some of these technologies, and then think of a sort of implementation science lens, right? To seeing what works, what doesn't, how do we scale some of these kind of early pilots and these early wins, right? And I have to say that part of that, again, is perhaps bringing in people like myself who have an appreciation for the technology, the ability to wear multiple hats, both as an academic, as an administrator, as a developer, being able to bring in the right people. But I also have to say, just point blank, that it starts at the top. It's with the leadership. It's President and CEO, Dr. Valerie Montgomery Rice, her vision for what needs to exist in the world is really what created the strategy, right? It is my boss, Dr. Priscilla Pimu, who was recently inducted to the National Medicine for her work around clinical trial recruitment. It's actually kind of a crazy story. I don't know if we have enough time, but literally the way that how did I get to Morehouse School of Medicine? This is a good question, right? So I, at the time, was doing a startup in the kind of AI, NLP service delivery space, working with kind of social service providers and kind of local governments and things like that. I did a residency at TED, actually gave a TED talk. Everyone should go check that out. And interestingly enough, met Dr. Pimu, who was in a subsequent cohort of that same TED residency. And actually, literally how I got to Morehouse School of Medicine is she said, hey, I have some data. Are you interested in collaborating? I was like, yeah, sure. I'd love to collaborate. I find this stuff interesting. And then over the course of that, not only did we get to know each other, but she asked, or I think I had asked her, she had asked me, hey, if there's any opportunities to join, to come down to Morehouse School of Medicine, let me know. Within a few weeks, I was able to come down as an instructor in the Department of Medicine, having, as I started this kind of conversation, hadn't taken a science class in a very long time. Now, I think since then, I've been able to kind of prove myself as an investigator, as a principal investigator, writing grants, building coursework, and things like that. But it really comes down to Dr. Priscilla Pimu and Dr. Elizabeth O'Feely and their vision for what I could bring to the table, that foresight, which makes it a reality.
So you gave two answers I wanted you to give because I wanted to be a little inspiration to people to say, it is a decision. There's that, like you said, is, hey, you do have to build things, but you don't have to rebuild everything. You got to find what are your opportunities, but you do have to have the vision. And there has to be this attitude from the top saying, hey, we're going to do something. You don't need to overnight go from, become the number one, site and hospital, research hospital in the entire world. But it's pilot projects. It's small projects.
There actually is a science to exactly what you're describing. So looking forward to unpacking that a little bit next time.
Right on. All right.
Yeah.
Everybody, this is Muhammad. This is Micah. We're signing off.